Into October we go, and this is when everything ratchets it up. Welcome into Six Rotations. I'm Daniel Gilman. He's Mick Haley, and we have an update on our polls. Yes, usually we just talk about the AVCA Top 25, but Mick, this is a poll-heavy episode. We've got the new RPI that the NCAA has released, and of course, on Sunday, October 3rd, the NCAA Committee came out with their top 10. So we are going to be comparing top 10s in this episode, brought to you, as always, by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. But Mick, before we jump into everything poll related, were there any big matches? We'll go over all of the fun. Was there anything that stood out to you here this weekend?
The thing that stood out to me is there were so many matches that weren't big as compared to the first 4 weeks. Boy, we had 10, 11 matches every week to talk about, and they were really good. We had some smaller matches that were good, but they didn't do anything to change the polls significantly. So that's the thing that I saw, and it was kind of a letdown for the spectator because you had to find teams that were just battling it out, but not necessarily ranked.
Well, let's go over a couple of the big storylines before we break down our AVCA top 10 from the coaches and our committee's top 10, which is what the NCAA bracket would look like. First, Purdue and Iowa, a couple weeks ago on ESPN, the metrics came out 230,000 viewers, which is the second most viewed regular season match since 2017. And of course, we know what the most viewed one was a couple weeks ago. We had a big upset over the weekday when Northwestern got their first road win over a top 10 team, taking down Minnesota. Minnesota, they are up and down 5 losses, but getting respect from the NCAA committee. We'll talk about that in a second. How good was Hannah Lesiak in that one, Mick? We've got that plus Wisconsin without Anna Schmeck. They took down Penn State, had themselves a good weekend. And how about Illinois? 2 very tight 5-set losses over this weekend. But the bigger story, I think, is maybe the fact that we still have a couple undefeateds here in October. How about Auburn, UCF, and of course, Texas, as they ran through their rivals, Texas Tech, as well as Louisville, who came back on Sunday on ESPN to have a little bit of a reverse 4-set win over Georgia Tech.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I watched the Northwestern Minnesota match, and Northwestern really is starting to get a base for their program. So they will be hard to play against every week now. Probably can't be as consistent as they were against Minnesota, but that's another team to watch out for now in the Big Ten. And as those teams get to that level where they can beat anybody, that's what makes it really fun.
So this is what we're going to do here. We're going to keep it top 10 heavy. That's what we're going to focus on in this episode. We'll have some of the following of 11 through 25 to talk about for you in the second half of our episode. But let's talk about it now. Let's look at the AVCA top 10 with the coaches decided. And I don't think that they made too many mistakes here, Mick. When we look at it now, where do you see the hodgepodge here in terms of maybe the second half of this top 10? Because our first 5 are staying pat. Actually, the first 6 haven't changed from last week.
Yeah, I see a couple things in the poll. I see the coaches recognizing that Minnesota is up and down and they can't trust them. So they moved them down 4 notches. I see Baylor getting a bad loss and the coaches moving them down 4 notches. But I see the team on the rise seems to be Oregon. They moved them up 4 notches. And Oregon's interesting because they're just kind of non-heard of in the preseason, and all at once now they're starting to come on. So those are the big movements in the poll. Plus, moving Michigan on, I don't know about that. Arkansas had a bad loss, maybe 2 bad losses actually. We expected them after that good weekend to keep going. But there might have been some other teams more worthy. Arkansas still got 66 points. And you talked about Illinois being close, but the coaches aren't convinced Illinois is for real. They give them only 3 votes.
Yeah, you know what? There were some interesting decisions on the bottom half of the AVCA top 25. Let's talk about that later, though. Let's just focus on top 10 matchups, and let's compare the AVCA top 10 to the NCAA Volleyball Committee, because you mentioned Oregon. Oregon's a team that isn't in the top 10 according to the coaches. They are about 250 points away from Pittsburgh there in the 9 spot. But respect given to the Ducks, who beat Stanford and sit atop the Cardinal in our top 10 here. Let's look at it. It's Texas 1 with Louisville 2. That stays the same from our coaches. USD bumps up over Big Red at the 3 spot. They had a perfect 6-0 weekend, and they are undefeated in West Coast Conference play. Then Nebraska, Pitt. So Pitt and Purdue are swapped here at 5 and 9, and then you see Ohio State and Oregon. This, as we see it, would be our top 10 if the season ended today. Do you have any qualms with it?
No, I don't have qualms with the teams as much as maybe the placement. And the placement doesn't seem to be significant when you first look at it, but it's significant for several reasons. The first 4 teams, whoever they end up being, will get to host regionals. And that's a big deal. They get to stay home. So right now you'd be looking at Texas, Louisville, San Diego, and Nebraska as hosting. And that's a big deal because it means the next 4 teams will have to travel, and the last 2, Purdue and Minnesota, would also have to travel. And if you look at the way that they have placed them, it's very interesting. If we could go to how they might go on the brackets, Texas would play Stanford, Pitt would end up playing Nebraska, and Purdue would be on that side. And as hot as they are, could beat any of those teams.
Well, yeah, you'll say Texas could play Stanford or Purdue, right? Of course, at 8 and
right.
9.
That's
and then you've
right.
got Louisville with the potential of possibly matching up with either Minnesota or Oregon. I want to talk a little bit about the West Coast, because clearly the Pac-12 and the West Coast Conference is getting the respect that we weren't sure fans were going to necessarily replicate the ideas of our committee. And of course, the committee is going to factor in everything. Oregon, they don't have the biggest non-conference wins, but they were able to squeak through Long Beach State in 5. I'm not sure that's really even considered a quality win. However, the undefeated start to conference play, that has them over Stanford. Stanford scheduled as hard as it comes, same as Texas, same as Ohio State. Clearly, OSU gets rewarded for that schedule, but the head-to-head is important because you see Purdue sitting just above Minnesota. I'm not quite sure what has Purdue behind the Pac-12 teams, but nonetheless, it's clear that the West Coast is being highly considered by this committee.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that they're getting that much respect, but the coaches have not shown that respect for the West Coast teams. So the committee is looking at either scheduling, RPI, or several other factors in getting them up there, or maybe they're just projecting what they think they're going to do. I think Purdue, with the freshmen like they have, everybody's holding back on them just a little bit. I mean, 5 anywhere in the top 10 is really good for Purdue. But they have to be a little bit more consistent. If those freshmen can go through the Big Ten grind, then we'll give them stars, because they're really producing right now. But you know how that grind goes. And if you haven't been through it before, it wears you down. So let's see how Purdue handles that.
Well, of course, Purdue has only lost 1 match, right?
Right. And on the West Coast, I don't think the Pac-12 is a grind. I mean, they're getting some easy matches now. They've morphed a little bit more towards the SEC or even the ACC, where the bottom half really doesn't put up a fight. And I'm sorry, but that's kind of true. If you look at the results this week, the bottom half against the top half, they're a 3-0, 3-0, 3-0, 3-0. And that's bothersome, because you want those teams to do better and take some games and challenge.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other teams that did still get recognition and are currently definitely on the fringe, right? They're on the door knocking. This is the rest of our top 25. And you mentioned Oregon. They are at 12, right? Minnesota, Oregon, not even in the top 10 from the coaches. Then Penn State sits. They picked up those 2 losses, obviously swept by Wisconsin. And then BYU, Florida. Washington is going to play Oregon this weekend. That'll be on ESPNU, if I'm not mistaken. That should be a really good one on Sunday. We'll talk about our matches to watch later in this episode. But then the rest, and it really feels right now, Mick, like it's maybe a top 16 and then everyone else, which for the committee's perspective, that's not too bad, because then they can have a little bit less gripe from the fans in giving those home courts, because of course, I don't have to say it again, but the top 16 seeds will all host the first 2 rounds. Are there any discrepancies where it sits maybe 17 to 25 here, where of course you mentioned maybe Michigan not necessarily deserving? I think they are certainly a top 25 team. I'm still wanting more from Western Kentucky. Rice sits up there at 22. We're going to talk about Rice and UCF in a minute in the RPIs, but where do you see there that maybe deserves a top 16 that isn't in it?
I don't see anybody there, but I would like to talk about the group of 5.
Let's do it.
You mentioned a couple of them, but the group of 5 has nothing to win and everything to lose. The group of 5 is Rice, Western Kentucky, Central Florida, Marquette, and Creighton. Because they only have each other to play in their conference and nobody else ranked, or they have nobody else to play in their conference, they just can't afford to lose to stay in the top 25. And all of those other mid-range schools playing in the Power 5 conferences are looking to jump on the top 25. Like you mentioned, Michigan. I think they have to beat some people, not just play in a conference because their RPI is high because they're playing. They have to beat some people to get on there. Western Kentucky, Rice, Central Florida, Marquette, and Creighton all scheduled real well preseason. They schedule better than Michigan at this point.
Right.
I'm not
and
Michigan.
UCF, right? A team like UCF where they you didn't get the pre-conference matchups. Maybe they just played Miami, Florida State, stuff like that.
So
I will say Michigan swept Penn State, though. That's a pretty good win.
Well, I think the jury's still out on Penn State. Okay. I mean, Penn State had that great weekend where they beat Stanford and Oregon. And that's their claim to fame right now. If they start beating some other people, then we'll be okay with Penn State. But Penn State's in the middle of the pack as far as I'm concerned right now.
Well, let me talk about a few of the other big matches from last week. Early in the week, Iowa State beat Baylor in 4. Baylor and Kansas dueled to an awesome one on Saturday, and Baylor won in 5. So that's kind of maybe why they sit a little bit lower in the standings. Auburn, how about this Auburn team? They haven't gotten 1 vote. They're not even in the receiving votes. They beat Mississippi State in 5 on Wednesday. That's a Mississippi State team that's top 10 in the RPI. And UCLA fell to Utah and Colorado. So are you putting UCLA in that bottom of the Pac-12? It's not going to make some noise?
Yeah, UCLA is simply not competitive right now. I don't know what's happened to them. I've watched them a little bit. I don't know. Each year they've had a new setter that kind of taken its toll on the program. I think I thought they had good talent. They seem athletic, so I don't know what's going on there.
You know what? Just too many big name transfers to try to bounce. And of course, Looper has been in and out. Let's talk about Rice, though. And this is going to bring in our RPI conversation. The RPI has just come out for the NCAA. UCF is 7th. That's probably the biggest eye-opening number there. But Rice sits at 11, and they are going to play Baylor on Wednesday, Mick. How about this? Baylor in Houston on Wednesday the 12th. So sorry, not this Wednesday, next Wednesday. But then unfortunately, we're going to have to wait till November 10th for Western Kentucky against Rice in order to really get a feel of the Conference USA. I don't know. The jury's still out, you mentioned, on a lot of these games.
Same thing was with Marquette and Creighton, though. Exact same thing with Marquette and Creighton. They all tried to schedule as hard as they could the first 4 weeks. Now they've only got to beat up on themselves, and that's why I say they can't afford to lose to anybody else. Rice could move themselves up by scheduling Baylor in the middle of their conference.
That's pretty wild. Yeah.
Very smart move by Rice. On the other, and they don't lose anything for losing to Baylor. Okay. Right. But if they beat Baylor, then they have a chance to jump up. And that puts a big question mark on Baylor and the Big 12. Is Baylor going to be down there with Kansas then? And maybe Texas Tech, I think, only lost two matches also.
Yep. Yeah. It's the Texas Tech. They beat West Virginia. Remember, this is a Big 12 that had 7 NCAA tournament teams a season ago. I am not predicting anywhere near that. Of course, we didn't predict it last year either. How about the Big 10? They have 7 teams in the top 25. And talking more about the Big Ten, Michigan 14th in the RPI. Arkansas in the SEC, they sacrificed a bit of a week there. They had a tough week, split with Mississippi State. Arkansas 1-5 on Sunday. They're 16th in RPI. Then you've got Houston at 19th, Mississippi State 21, Creighton and Marquette in the top 25 in RPI, but the top is still heavy. Texas, Louisville, Ohio State, 1, 2, 3 in that RPI. Where do you feel about the Buckeyes? Because the Buckeyes are getting love from everybody. They're just not winning all these games. Ohio State and Minnesota both 7-5.
I'll tell you, if Jen Oldenburg was playing for the Buckeyes, I would keep them up there really high. What a competitive young lady and a great coach. But I am not convinced that the Buckeyes will show up every night. So the Big Ten schedule will let us know about the Buckeyes, because now they have to grind. And I think she put a schedule together to challenge her team. And I told her when we had her on another show that I just really thought I wanted to pat her on the back for taking the risk of going after it. So I don't want to trash the Buckeyes too much, because they really put their team on call. So let's see how they do in the Big Ten now. That will tell us whether they're ready to go for the championship or not.
Oh, I'm not going to trash them. I think it shows one thing, Mick, and it's that wins and losses, as long as you're over 500, are a little bit irrelevant as long as you're playing the best teams. And that's what Ohio State showed us this season. The committee rewarded it. This is the first look, folks, that we are going to get at what the committee values. And Ohio State is 6th in the nation in the coaches poll. And then the committee went ahead and bumped them up and gave them the 6th spot as well. So a 7-5 record for Ohio State and Minnesota. They're going to get Penn State and Northwestern at home. That Friday night Penn State-Ohio State matchup, Mick, could be that look at the Nittany Lions to see if they can garner a little bit more respect. But aside from that, there are some non-Power 5 teams that I think maybe push their way into the picture here this weekend. And I want to give some due to them as well, because the Big West Conference has 2 teams that are sitting undefeated and looking like they could possibly make some noise. Santa Barbara on ESPNU came from behind down 20-12 to win the 4th set and beat Cal Poly. They're undefeated. Hawaii has lost just 1 set in all of conference play. That was against Long Beach on Saturday in Long Beach. So Hawaii and Santa Barbara deserve a little bit of love. And Syracuse in the ACC, Mick, they're 4-0. Something to keep an eye on there. North Dakota State 5-0 for the first time in 12 years.
Yeah, I think you have to give the Syracuse coaching staff some real kudos. I believe when they came on board, they only had 7 players left in the program. And in less than 6 months, they've put this team together and they're playing at a pretty high level. So I agree with you on Syracuse. I also don't know anything about Townsend, but everybody tells me Townsend's for real, and we ought to keep an eye on them. And then in the AAC with Central Florida, Houston is another team that's moving to the Big 12 next year that doesn't get any love, but seems to be getting respect from the coaches.
Well, we just talked about Houston a little bit, and we could talk Towson. Towson 16-0. They're all conference wins are by 3-0, or there was just a 3-1 set win over North Carolina A&T. So that's a situation where they're just not going to play anyone for the rest of the year, Mick, right? Hofstra, Charleston, William and Mary, Elon. It's not going to be anything, but they're sitting at 27. So maybe, just maybe, if other teams lose, the Towson win in 4 over Pittsburgh could get them into the top 25. But I think we might have to just wait for their 3rd straight NCAA tournament trip to judge them.
That may be right. Mississippi State's got an awfully high RPI. The coaches don't give them much respect. 4 votes.
Well, they didn't give them any respect in the non-conference either, right? So that's something that's continuing. To be honest, they just didn't. They didn't schedule as hard as teams wanted them to. They lost to Houston in 5. They lost to Michigan. And it's not like the SEC, until you play Florida or Kentucky, is going to show you your worth, right?
Yeah, I think Georgia's coming on. So I think you've got Florida, Kentucky, Georgia. One team we haven't talked about is LSU, who had a bang-up weekend where they beat Arkansas on Wednesday and then split with Kentucky in the weekend, played 3 top teams in 1 week last week. So, but then this week, I think they came up and they lost a match. So they're a team that can upset in the SEC, but doesn't look like they can carry their load.
Well, Friday night, UCF Houston, you mentioned Houston. That's going to be the test in the AAC. That's at 7 o'clock on ESPN Plus. Saturday and Sunday, LSU in Gainesville to take on the Gators. I wanted to rep it. I've got an old Florida volleyball polo here. I'm down in South Florida, taking a trip back home. So that's why the background is a little different, and I had to scavenge through some old polos. But I'm excited for that because LSU has a chance, Mick, to truly put themselves in that top 5, top 6 in the SEC and solidify that they could be a top 4 team there.
Well, that's a new coach in Tanya Johnson,
Yep.
doing a really nice job. Former assistant at University of Texas and former head coach at Georgia Tech. So she's getting a second opportunity head coaching wise over at LSU. So you're going to get to see her firsthand in action.
Yeah, looking forward to that. That'll be on SEC Network Extra or Plus. So you could do that. And then now what I want to do is, we mentioned we were going to read one person's perspective in every episode. So today, commenting here on YouTube is Mickey. And Mickey's got his 7, same as I did, in terms of teams that can win the national championship. And so, Mick, what I want to do here is talk about these teams and then look at the committee's top 10 and play a little bit of what if right now, because why not, right? We're sitting here in the beginning of October. Let's build our Elite 8 from the top 10 teams, assuming that it's just them. And so from Mickey's perspective, his tier 1, Texas, Nebraska, Louisville, no hot takes there. Tier 2, he's got Washington and Minnesota, and then Purdue and Oregon in tier 3. He thinks that those 3 in the Texas, Nebraska, Louisville are the true contenders. And then he thinks San Diego will be a top 4 seed that doesn't make it out of their own regional, a la Texas in 2019, Wisconsin in 2016. So what I want you to do, Mick, is look at this top 10, try to figure out, right? We know who could play who. The 1 matches up against the 8-9, the 2 against the 7-10, 4-5 as well. Where do you feel is your top 4 teams, the final 4, but it's not the best 4. It's based off of the bracket that the committee has given us so far.
Well, if we look at the bracket the committee has given us, then, I like Texas. I think Louisville can hold their own. I think Nebraska will hold their own. And the question is, USD depends on who they throw in there with them. Right now, it looks like it's Ohio State.
Ohio State, or whoever the 11 would be. Yes.
Yeah, I just don't. I've talked to the people on the West Coast, and Washington's not making anybody a believer out there.
No.
And they've lost their right side to an ankle sprain now. So the next couple of weeks, they'll be functioning 1 player short, like a lot of other teams have had to do.
And let me just, Maddie Ensley, right? They made the move for her to the right side. Imani Bush went to the left side. Then they had to fill in. Audra Wilms came in. She had a poor first match, did well against Cal. They'll play Oregon this weekend, though, so we should get a good look. I just wanted to fill in some names for you.
That's good. That's good. That's kind of stuff that people want to know out there, because, the Pac-12 network's hard to get. It's a different time.
That's an understatement. Yep.
Everybody wants this information. So tune in, because we will try to give it to you.
So walk me through it. So it'll be Stanford and Purdue. The winner of that would play against Texas. Who do you see edging out between Stanford and Purdue?
Well, right now I take Stanford.
Okay.
I just like their athletes, but let me tell you, Stanford, you can't count on them. They don't play with any energy, and Purdue plays with energy. Purdue's fun to watch because they bring it every second, and that could cause Stanford some problems. Now, if Stanford gets fired up for the match, then I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't like Stanford.
I'm giving Purdue. Yeah, Stanford is not impressing me right now, at least. There's got to be something going on with Cami Minor. I'm not sure if it's an injury. The chemistry feels off. What about then we can move forward? Nebraska Pitt would play against the winner of that, 4 and 5.
I just think Nebraska's too consistent. Pitt has trouble scoring. And I think Pitt could be a team that gets upset before they get there.
I agree. You know what? It just hasn't felt like the year for Pitt. So much turnover, so much lost. but you never know. They did just get Alexis, the center back a couple weeks ago. How
Yeah.
about 7-10? So we've got Oregon against Minnesota to play against Louisville.
I just like Minnesota a lot because they're just so, their offense is so good, but I don't know if we can count on them to go through the tournament and have, 6 good matches in a row. They
Yep.
haven't shown that they can play 6 in a row yet. So, well, that's a toss-up.
You took it right out of my notes. I put that down. I said, can Schaffmaster put together a consistent stretch? Because even back in the Seliger Swenson days, right? They got upset by Oregon, and so going back to a rematch in that, I am favoring the senior leadership of Nunaviller and company there. And Oregon this weekend could certainly provide a punch to the nation if they beat Washington and solidify themselves, right? They get that second marquee conference win over Stanford and Washington. So you've got that there. How about then against Louisville? You mentioned it already. You see Louisville moving on. So we've got Texas and Louisville. You said that you thought Nebraska would be a team that moves on as well. Then you've got that fourth Final Four team. And as we sit right now, it would be potentially San Diego against Ohio State, or San Diego maybe playing against a team in the 11 or 12 spot. Let's right now, for the sake of it, let's say that's Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin gets the 11 spot, plays against Ohio State. That would be a wild third round matchup.
That would be wild. But if USD gets to host the regional and Wisconsin or any of those teams have to go to San Diego, it's a definite advantage for USD because that's where they can win. They can win at home with the crowd. Hopefully it doesn't get too big for them, but
that's what I'm thinking. It's tough. Everyone else has been there except for this new team in the Toreros.
Yeah. So, but I think they're capable as long as they're healthy. So, but I still like Louisville as being on the other side of the bracket, no matter who comes. They're war tested. They're back with a focus. They don't have Stevenson, who I adored. I just thought she was a warrior for them. And that's the one thing that bothers me. I just don't know who's going to carry it. I mean, those two lefts, DeBeer and Chaussee, those two kids are great, but they need somebody else to count on. And Smith is not necessarily the person I think or Jones, which is it?
Jones, Iko Jones. Well, I was really impressed by Amaya Tillman watching her on Sunday on ESPN. The comeback at home, they showed composure. I'm gonna lean against San Diego for the time being. Just there's got to be, you can't go chalk, right? We can't say 1, 2, 3, 4. So obviously we're gonna pick one team to get upset. I'm thinking maybe Wisconsin, maybe even BYU. Imagine if BYU had to go to USD, an atmosphere they know, and a rematch there. That could be a fun Elite Eight matchup.
That would be very interesting. I would be interested to see if the committee chose to put them in that bracket.
Or Pepperdine, of course. As we kind of move on here, I want to talk about a couple big things. My favorite moment of the weekend. How about this? Our girl Jayla Zimmerman, who hasn't been able to play this season, unfortunately. She came in as Creighton was up 2-0 against Butler, served set point to win the match, her first action of the season, and it was emotional. It got teary-eyed. It was incredible. And then I mentioned it earlier, the best player this weekend around the nation was Ava Hudson. Eva was incredible. She jumps out of the gym. And I got a text from John Shondell, the associate head coach there at Purdue, who's been there forever. He texted me and he said, in his voice, he goes, "Danny, this is the best player I've ever seen play volleyball." And that is a massive, massive statement coming from someone who has obviously coached the names that he has in the years that he's been out there. So I'm curious to keep a tighter eye on Hudson. We'll talk Purdue, though, because we've got our matches to watch, Mick. Iowa, Purdue on BTN on Wednesday, followed by Wisconsin, Indiana. You got your Longhorns facing TCU as Baylor and Oklahoma will match up. Miami, Florida State, the two teams, a winner stays relevant, loser goes home kind of matchup on Wednesday in the Sunshine State, on ACC Network.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Miami's been trying to prove themselves, and Florida State can't seem to quite get back. So this is a death match for those two. You're right. They They have to bring it, both of them.
They're both 2-2. They both lost to NC State. They both beat North Carolina over the weekend. Florida State did in 5. Undefeated Auburn at LSU on Wednesday as well. Then Nebraska, Michigan State. Can Leah Johnson get that first marquee win for the Spartans against Big Red? That'll be on Big Ten Network. The only real match on Thursday. So you got nothing else going on, right? I don't know what the football game is, but it should be a great match in Lansing. Then Penn State, Ohio State. We talked about that on BTN on Friday night, followed by Minnesota, Michigan. Kentucky, Arkansas plays Friday and Saturday. We talked about LSU, Florida. What's your favorite between Kentucky, Arkansas, and LSU, Florida, quickly?
Well, I would look in on LSU, Florida, and if it's a match, I'll stay.
There you go.
Otherwise, I'm going to the other one.
Fayetteville, yep. But then also in Houston, UCF against Houston Friday night will be something that we have our eyes glued on. At least we're keeping tabs, because if UCF runs through Houston on the road, you can stamp that this top 10 RPI team is here to stay.
Yeah, I think UCF knows that. I think UCF will do that. But Houston's at home. Houston, you got to be careful.
I was going to say they beat Texas in the first set. I think they're going to take the first 2 against UCF. I think UCF comes back, forces a 5th, then the coins get flipped. Saturday, Nebraska, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Purdue. Unfortunately, Big Ten football dominates, so all that will be on BT Plus or Big Ten Plus, and then LSU, UCF as well. But then Sunday's great, Nick. We finally get that Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech matchup. Those were the classics from last season. Every time they played, it went the distance. That's 2:00 Eastern on ACC Network. Oregon, Washington at 7:00 Eastern. That'll be available on Pac-12 networks. I want to correct myself, not ESPNU, because Stanford, Utah, 6:00 Eastern is on ESPNU on Sunday. Do you think Utah has a bit of a fight in that?
No, I think Utah cannot score enough points, and Maddie Robinson's been out, and she's their arm. If she doesn't get 25 points and 50 swings, that I don't think they can win. So I think you're watching is Washington, Oregon. That's gonna show where everybody is. Even though Washington's a little dinged up, they still have to play and see where they are. So yeah, I like that one.
That should be free for everyone, 7:00 Eastern on Pac-12 networks. And then can Northwestern get another top 10 win on the road? They head out to Columbus for an afternoon match against Ohio State. That's our slate for this weekend, Mick. It's a little bit better, I think, than last week. So hopefully coming in next weekend, we'll have some big upsets to talk about and more comparisons, hypotheticals. I want to know what your Final Four is. Everyone at home, comment here on the YouTube. Just send us your 4 names. We'll compare it all. Maybe I'll make a little bit of a Google Doc. That's going to wrap us up, though. For Mick Haley, I'm Daniel Gilman. Thank you so much for watching another episode of 6 Rotations.